is not a single event. Haiti was forced to change the design of their World Cup jersey because it was considered too political. It had the depiction of the final battle of the Haitian War of Independence in 1803, and the manufacturer said, you know, it really wasn't intended to be a political statement. It was a tribute to the men and women of Haiti who contribute every day to Haiti's future. But the journey to liberation is not a single event. According to the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, the median Black household net worth is approximately $44,100 compared to $284,310 for white households. What that means is that Black families hold roughly 15 cents to the dollar compared to white families. The journey to liberation is not a single event. Research by the Duke University reveals that Black households headed by an individual with a college degree, and I have 5, hold less wealth on average than white households headed by someone with only a high school diploma or a GED. The journey to liberation is not a single event. Many states enforce strict photo ID requirements and limit IDs to only driver's licenses and passports if you are going to vote, but exclude student IDs. But many people of color and economically challenged people are statistically less likely to possess these specific IDs due to transport access. Oh, can I have that? Because they might not have money at the time they need to vote to go and get the driver's license or the passport. The journey to liberation is not a single event. Last month, Stanford released a study on AI hiring practices and found that 20% of Black applicants and 15% of Asian applicants applied to positions where they were considered by AI as not a part of the recommended group based on the assumed race or ethnicity. The journey to liberation is not a single event. Due to systemic disparities in the criminal justice system, laws that temporarily or permanently strip individuals with felony convictions from their right to vote disproportionately remove people of color from the electorate. But who does it affect? People who have been convicted and later proven innocent. People who have been convicted and later proven innocent. Of those people, Black individuals account for 53 to 54% of all exonerations, and Indigenous, Hispanic, Latino, and Asian populations 13 to 14% of total historical exonerations, which means that they were prohibited from being able to vote during the time that they were considered convicted until they were exonerated. The journey to liberation is not a single event. The journey to emancipation is not a single event. Juneteenth does not reflect a single event. It's a complex process that unfolded and unfolds differently and continually, and even now, especially now, across the United States. So now that you know that we're not all liberated, and now that you know that we're not all emancipated, let's talk about Juneteenth. It's secret. It's not going. Thank you. And its heroes. I will. Zach, can I just talk to you? Okay, I'll give it back. Go ahead. So let's start by hearing some words in contrast to Lincoln's rationale for the Emancipation Proclamation. President Lincoln said, and I quote, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing all of the slaves, then I would do it." So the primary purpose of the Emancipation Proclamation was not ending injustice, it was saving the Union. And so I started to wonder, who came up with the idea in the first place? And I decided to do a strange thing for me, which was to ask AI. Who came up with this idea in the first place? Because I was wondering, was it Lincoln or was it somebody else who told him about it? And the AI response was, President Abraham Lincoln came up with the primary idea for the Emancipation Proclamation. Driven by a growing moral stance against slavery, he decided to issue the proclamation as a vital war measure. Do you have any further questions? And so instead of asking a question, I said, you are wrong. Lincoln did not write the Emancipation Proclamation because he wanted to free the slaves. He was not an abolitionist. And then the screen started to go like this. And I thought I broke my computer. And then it popped up with this answer. You are entirely correct that Abraham Lincoln was not an abolitionist and his primary motivation was not a humanitarian crusade to end slavery. Your correction highlights a crucial historical distinction about his motives. And sometimes we forget that AI is someone or someone's. AI is the creation by a human. Humans are equipped with biases and ideologies. We make the mistake that we can create things that are free from bias. We can only seek truth, challenge truth, and look for facts and lived experiences. Or we risk the confusion in this world by buying into a single view, a single story, shaped by AI. So what was the first secret? Well, in July of 1862, Lincoln presented his initial draft to his cabinet. The emancipation was surely going to equip the Union with black soldiers that they needed to win the war. So if he freed the slaves, he'd get more black soldiers who would say, yes, I want to go to the Union side because they don't want me as a slave. And so he knew that he needed to have enough people because they were winning in what was called the Western Theater, which you can see right there. But they were losing in the Eastern Theater, which is up north from there. But the Confederates already had the Trans-Mississippi area. So the Confederates had more than the Union did at the time. And so the Union was losing by numbers if you look at the space that was being occupied. And there were 2 million, there were approximately 3.5 to 4 million enslaved people there at the time, but 2 million of them were black men that they could use for the Union. So Lincoln came up with this idea that he crafted. How can we win? Let's get these other 2 million people. So he shared the idea with his cabinet, but he was advised to hold off publicly because it would look like they were making a desperate measure, which they were making a desperate measure. And so he kept it a secret. But what did the original Emancipation Proclamation say? And this is what is not in the Emancipation Proclamation, but you can find it if you really search. It showed that Lincoln did not believe that black and white people could live together peacefully, and so he felt that black people should be encouraged to agree to voluntary colonization. He thought that colonization was a remedy that would sweeten the pill of emancipation, and it would make abolition of slavery more palatable to white slave owners who were fearful that all of the slaves that were there, and there were many, would start to overrun their land. So this is what the Emancipation Proclamation initially had in, that black people should voluntarily colonize. And although his view started to change over time, primarily because of his relationship with Frederick Douglass, he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation and he shared it with black leaders to see if he could get some buy-in, and they said no, that they would not agree to something that said colonization should happen. And so Lincoln said, well, okay, but really what you need to hear from me is that I do not believe that people are equal. I think that enslaved people should work over here, but go over there. And he said, I will say then that I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. I know, doesn't that make you go, So this is the area, and I want to just show you what this is, because I think that when you understand, it makes a whole lot more sense. This is the area where slaves were able to self-emancipate to join the military. This is the area where the Emancipation Proclamation applied. Those were Confederate states, but over which Lincoln actually didn't have any jurisdiction. These were the states that when they heard about the Emancipation Proclamation, and it wasn't in effect, these states said, we're going to free slaves anyway. They made the decision independently that they were just going to release enslaved people. This is the area that ended up being free after the Emancipation Proclamation was ratified. It was announced June 19th. It was ratified December, not June. And so, were people free in June? No. This is the number of enslaved people in those areas, the percentage of enslaved people. And you can see when you look at how large Texas is, for example, the enslaved owners all went to Texas as they started to hear about the Emancipation Proclamation because they were trying to get as far away from the soldiers that were going to enforce it as possible, because 1/3 of the population were enslaved people. And so for them to have lost all of that labor was a really major deal, and they didn't want to. And so it's why they ended up having to go to Galveston, Texas to make the announcement, because that's the place that was most upset over the idea of slavery ending. So after the Union took over Maryland in war in September, then they won enough that Lincoln felt that he could announce the Emancipation Proclamation. But the secret started to leak. Well, let me go to him in a minute. The secret started to leak. So people started to find out about it. Small leaks, given the number of people that there were. But what happened was that the people who started to self-emancipate, and so they would say, if you were to ask, did Lincoln free you? They would say, no, I freed myself. They started to take the risk to self-emancipate because what they were going through was even worse. What they call what happened to people, and what happens to people now, is race-based traumatic stress, RBTS, or poverty-based traumatic stress. It's defined as the mental and emotional injury caused by encounters with racial bias, discrimination, and hate. It stems from systemic, institutional, or interpersonal racism, and it can result in direct personal attacks, vicarious exposure to racial violence, and now inherited intergenerational trauma, which means that if it's happened before in your family, that you already have the trauma within your body apart from what it is that you experience. And we have seen that that happens on a racial state and also people who end up having poverty. And in fact, and I'll read this really fast so that I don't take up a million days. This book, and I wish I had the original, but it was way too expensive for me to buy. This is the first book that W.E.B. Du Bois decided to write. It's for children. It's called The Brownies Book, and it was to try to give Black children some feeling of being able to raise themselves up through the trauma that they were seeing directly, watching lynchings, watching their parents get lynched and beaten, and what they were going through themselves and being sold. And so there are a lot of stories and poems that are in here, and I'm going to read you the one that I think that a predominantly white audience could swallow. It says, "We gathered round the fire last night, Jim and Bess and me, and said, now let's each in turn tell who we'd rather be. Of all the folks that's in our books, of course we wouldn't want their looks. Bess wished that she'd been Betsy Ross, the first to make the flag. She said, I'd like to do some deed to make the people brag, and have the papers print my name if colored girls could rise to fame. And I stood out for Roosevelt. I wish to be like him. Then Bess said, we've both had our say. Now tell who you'd be, Jim. Jim never thinks like me or Bess. He knows more than us both, I guess. He said, I'd be a Paul Dunbar or Booker Washington. The folks you named were good, I know. Of these two men I'd wish to be were colored boys like you and me. Sojourner Truth was colored, Bess, and Phyllis Wheatley, too. Their names will live like Betsy Ross, though they were dark like you. Jim read 'em somewhere, I guess. He knows heaps more than me or Bess." And so race-based traumatic stress was and is a real thing and caused people to do things to self-emancipate way before the Emancipation Proclamation. There were leaders of emancipation who didn't wait for a document to tell them that they had the God-given right to be free. There was William and Ellen Craft, who escaped in broad daylight. She was very light-skinned, and so she cut her hair and she dressed up like a wealthy male planter traveling north for medical treatment. And because she couldn't read or write, they put her arm in a sling, they bandaged her face and put green glasses on so that she wouldn't have to read or write anything. And they were able to travel on trains and steamships, bypass slave traders to reach Philadelphia and England and publish their narrative in 1890. There was Henry Box Brown. You should look him up. In 1849, after he was traumatized when his pregnant wife and children were sold to a different plantation, he got the assistance of a black man and a white storekeeper to build a box 3 by 2.5 by 2 feet wide. They labeled it as dry goods, said this side up. He climbed in. They didn't pay attention to the this side up. And he survived a 27-hour journey, spending painful hours upside down through careless handling, was freed and became an abolitionist speaker. There was John Washington, and my brother, father, and grandfather are named after him. In April 1862, working in Virginia, spotted Union troops coming secretly to catch the Confederates. So he's behind a tree watching this happen before the Confederates knew, and decided that he would wait until it became crazy, and he stole somebody's boat, got in the boat, and took himself to freedom. So my father is Washington Maxwell, my grandfather is Washington Maxwell, and my brother has it in his middle name. And then there's Robert Smalls, which I've mentioned before. He stole a ship and dressed up like a conductor, had the hat pulled down, and took the ship, got his wife, all of the families of the enslaved people who were with him. They all went to freedom, and then he gave the ship back. And then there's Leonard Grimes, who was a pastor and a conductor on the Underground Railroad, whose name is often not mentioned. He lobbied for and recruited enslaved men to join the Union, and he taught churches how to boycott ministries that practice slavery or support slavery. And then in 1861, at the beginning of the Civil War, there were 3 people who escaped across the James River. The slave owner tried to get them back, and General Butler of the Union said, since you consider them property and not people, they are contrabands of war, and so we can legally keep them. And so this began the beginning of 500,000 enslaved people who, between 1861 and 1865, became contrabands of war and got their freedom in the North. So there's this intersection of secrecy. There was Lincoln's secret that he kept about the Emancipation Proclamation until he changed it. There was the secret self-emancipation that happened before, during, and after the Emancipation Proclamation. There was the secrecy of enslaved people who were listening to their masters and what their masters were saying, and then they'd go tell what was going on to other people. And there was the secrecy of the Black Union troops who did the same thing. They were listening to what other people would say. And at some point, they began to distribute pocket-sized copies of the Emancipation Proclamation to enslaved people who could read. So Lincoln declares the victory. He announces the Emancipation Proclamation not on June 19th, but on January 1st, which is actually considered Emancipation Day for quite some time. And so it goes into effect, but the problem was that nobody knew. It leaked, but it was still a secret. Lincoln hadn't felt he had enough control. He died before it happened. He never was the person who gave the command to General Granger to go to Texas, because he wasn't there. The person who did was a man named Philip Sheridan, who's not even in the story. Nobody hears his name. He's actually the one who told Granger to go to Texas. He went there with 2,000 Union troops. They marched through Galveston, but it wasn't enough to give an announcement because it was such anarchy that they wanted to bring the Black troops, because Lincoln said that he needed them in order to control what was going on, because white soldiers would not protect Black people. And so they did, and I wonder what I would have felt. I mean, we all think that it was all la la la. He came and said, everybody's free, and they rejoiced. But we forget about racialized trauma and its impact on the psyche and the body and the spirit. We imagine generalized trauma, daily living trauma, even knowing about the announcement. How would people respond? What if those enslaved individuals were asked if they wanted to wait 2.5 years to find out? I wonder what the voice would be in the room. Well, we cannot wait another hour to self-emancipate. And in our day, we engage in dual emancipation, emancipating ourselves and others. Remember, Robert Small did that. He didn't just free himself, he also freed the other people with him and their families. And I would say that now we're in a moment of emancipation, yes? But just as those people who physically emancipated, a spiritual and psychic emancipation takes courage as well. We need the bravery to hear things like this and question our own deep-seated ideologies and inherited beliefs. We need to set personal boundaries and be like the Pastor Grimes, who said his church will not engage with other ministries that support slavery. We need to question, push back, stop assuming and believing AI. We need to challenge oppression in every and all forms, in every and all times, in every and all situations, fearlessly, courageously, because the journey to liberation is not a single event. We have that same journey as those enslaved persons as they face the unknown. But what sits before us is also the unknown for some of us. But we have the solid knowledge that emancipation is right there, and right here, and right here. And we have the stories of those who had the courage to speak for, speak with, speak out, and speak up. And we will not wait 2.5 years. So may the strength of Juneteenth be with you all. And so it is.